One of the things that's really difficult is that we don't know what's going to happen. So I wanted to focus a little bit on that today. So we always feel fear in response to threat. So this is our nervous system. We become hypervigilant when we're afraid because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. And then we know that we get this rush of adrenaline and cortisol, and that helps us to be alert. We have, blood flow to our muscles so that we can run. We have all of that. And then our more sophisticated brain, the prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning, often goes offline. Because we don't need to be able to know the nuances of things usually in order to keep ourselves safe from kind of threats that we evolved to work with. So that's one thing that's really important to know about the nervous system, is that it's evolved to work with immediate life threats, like a tiger jumping out from a bush. It's not really evolved to work with this kind of thing. So when we feel fear, which we do when we're threatened, and we should, if we're not feeling fear, it's probably because we're in freeze. And so that would be kind of a dead feeling. It's not really a stillness. It's more of a numbness, or I can't connect with my body or something like that. But we have these responses because that's how our nervous system's set up, and we are in these mammal bodies. And we also have this higher level development. We're human beings. We have heart. We have all of these other things, and we have these nervous systems. So whenever we're feeling threat, we always go with one of those four or a combination. So flight, we'll try to get away, fight, freeze, and then the fawn are the survival responses. And I think it helps with the shaming to know that these are natural responses in the nervous system and we don't choose them. If someone grabs that last roll of toilet paper, which seems to be a rather strange phenomenon in this particular pandemic, but more important, if somebody goes after our food, there's a limited amount of food on the shelves and someone comes in and takes more than what we would see as their share, we might get very angry. It activates some kind of a response in us. It's helpful for us to know that all of these nervous system responses in us and other people are natural. It's just part of our survival system, and that we don't have to shame ourselves for them. So we might want to work with them. We might want to calm our system so we're not being driven by them, but not to shame ourselves for having the response in the first place. One of the differences from a lot of the work that we do around trauma healing is a lot of the times we're working with the past, and we have a skewed perception of threat because of past harm, and we're not actually in much danger now in the present. But that's not the case with this pandemic. This is a present moment danger. There's a virus, it's spreading, but we know that our nervous system is going to try and keep us safe. And it's going to take all the lessons that we've learned from prior times in our life, and it's going to use those to try to keep our survival maximized. So our nervous system, our primitive brain is always trying to keep us safe. One thing that we know from experiences is that when we're in a familiar location, our brain doesn't have as much work to do, so our hypervigilance settles. So if you're out on the street and it's a familiar street, it's a sunny day, it's before this whole pandemic came along, you might, walk by a coffee shop and sit out in the sunshine and enjoy a drink. Or when you're out on the road and you're in hotels, you're never quite as relaxed as you are when you're at home in your own bed. So it's really makes common sense that our nervous system scans everything. And they say something that we have like 10,000 thoughts a minute or something. Might be an hour, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like a minute. But that almost everything that comes through the brain, all the sense perceptions, what we see, what we hear, almost all of it is ignored because it's familiar. And we already know that that's not going to be a threat to us. So we don't have to know. So in this new situation, we don't know where the threat is. We know that there's an activated danger. We know that we're in more danger than we were before. So that's something that we're noticing is very different from before. So our hypervigilance is in a large extent due to the fact that we don't know what's going to happen. It's not familiar to us. So even if somebody was affected by the SARS outbreak or H1N1 or something, this is different. This is a scale that's different. Distancing is different. So this is something new. So the brain always is going to have trouble with that. We don't have anything from the past that we can reliably use to predict the future. And that's scary for our system. So there's a few practical things we can do. We can use reliable information. We can calm our nervous system. If you find that you're really obsessively gathering data, we could just notice that we might reach a point where it's alarming us more than reassuring us. And some people just have their system set up that if I really know more about what's going on, I'll be able to manage this better. I'll know the right thing to do. And in fact, we can't actually know the right thing to do. We can generally know what's the level of threat, how can we, use hand sanitizer, and how can we be smart. We don't really know. So that's a difficulty for us too. So for most of us, limiting our exposure to the news just to what we need to know is good. Like I'm not looking into anything that talks about what happens if you get it, because I don't want to scare myself with those thoughts. And I don't need to know that. All I need to know really is how to protect myself and how to minimize my risk. That's what most of us need to know right now. So just to be cognizant of the effect of things, and then how can we work with that to keep ourselves as calm as possible. So emotional flashbacks are that present moment felt sense in our body of fear and dread. I think we all feel that in the moment. We all feel more fear. We're more hypervigilant. There's a feeling of something bad is coming. It's not probably here yet for most of us, but something bad is happening. It's coming. And we don't know how bad it's going to be. And that lands on any experience of fear that we've had in the past. So if you had an experience, especially when you were afraid as you were growing up as a child, then that is a pervasive felt sense in your nervous system and in your body. And that is going to make this feel more intense. So you could look at the resources we have on emotional flashbacks. That would help. But also just to acknowledge that this is how it is. That if we've had a lot of hurt and abuse and damage and people that have been not keeping us safe that should have, or a feeling of disconnection, or not really being attached, to feeling like we were on our own, we didn't have anyone to turn to, all of those past experiences are going to make this current one a lot more intense. So I'd like to stop and pause here now to look at and to kind of sense, and we'll do a little practice around this, that we're actually not in the same situation as we were. So we're safe in a different way than we were then. When we were a child, we don't have a lot of agency or control. We don't have a job. We can't go out and get a different place to live if we're scared at home. We tend to internalize the criticisms that come our way, or that feeling of disconnection. We have that feeling that there must be something wrong with us if someone doesn't love us and they're not taking care of us. So we have an emotional maturity now that we didn't before. Until the pandemic came along, we had a different experience of safety. Most of us are in a physically safe situation where we're not going to be hurt by the people that we're living with. And so that's different than it was before. We have resilience. We've learned to breathe. We've learned to really notice the sunshine on our face. We've learned to connect with people. So even though we had a disconnect when we were growing up, we've found ways now to connect in our own heart, to connect with other people, and to stay in the present. So this is in the past, we've had an experience of powerlessness or helplessness, and we might be experiencing a lot of that now. But I'd like to take a few minutes now to do a kind of a guided practice and visualization of strength. So get yourself settled and notice what's in your body. Notice the energy. If there are things that are tight, could you soften that? Settle into the experience in your body. And if you were to say to yourself, I'm afraid, I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm strong, I'm resilient. I have a lot of strengths and connections that will help get me through this. Let's sit with that. I'm strong and resilient. Notice what that feels like in your body. Notice your breath. Notice that we have the emotional stability to stay present in our body with our breath. We could relax our shoulders. We could soften the belly. That we're not actually taken over by fear. We can stay present with ourselves right now. And bring to mind some experiences from your past, maybe recent or a while ago. What's your experience right now with your emotional stability and resilience and strength? What comes to mind as an example of that? And then really vividly see it. Put yourself back visually, feel it in your body. If you're standing, feel the strength in your legs. Feel the groundedness in your mind. You're able to stay present in your body with your breath. And let yourself run through that. Maybe you were feeling afraid and you still said something that needed to be said. We feel that in our body, there's a certain energy to that. And then we face it and we say it, or we do it. And we live through it. It actually feels very powerful to stand up for ourselves, to be strong. Notice your breath. Notice your mind. What are the thoughts in your mind? We're not really asking the mind to help us figure anything out at the moment. And we might bring to mind our experience this week as an example of resilience and strength. Even though we've been experiencing more fear than usual, our bodies might be tight, we might have had a lot more catastrophic thoughts, that we've been bringing ourselves back. And we know that because we're here, for one thing. Maybe we've been practicing kindness for ourselves. Even with this experience of heightened fear, that we're not turning against ourselves, or if we do, we're noticing it and then coming back, reassuring ourselves. So we can notice with catastrophic thinking that we avoid being in our body. So with mindfulness, it's all about staying present. And with catastrophic thinking or with fear, our experience is so difficult that we don't want to stay present. So even when we're doing a practice of resilience, we might still find that our mind, we're just being taken back up into the mind a lot, that our mind loses the focus and gets caught up in some kind of planning or what if scenarios. So if that's the case, we could just notice that. We know some really effective ways to work with catastrophic thinking. One is to notice it. One is to do some tapping, put the thoughts into a frame or the pictures and tap on the forehead. Take your attention into the sound of the tapping, the sensation of the tapping. We actually know quite a bit, and we've all, I'm sure, been practicing this a certain amount. We know a lot about this, how to avoid the catastrophic thinking that can really kind of take us out of our body. Another thing that's helpful is to put a period on the end of the sentence. If we're noticing that something keeps taking us out of our present moment, if something's scaring us, I don't know what's going to happen. Put a period on the end of the sentence. Just say, I don't know what's going to happen, or I'm afraid, or whatever it might be, and then put a period on the end of the sentence. So do that now. If there's any fear thoughts, if there's any catastrophic thinking, put it into words. Hear the words in your mind and then say, period. It's like a signal to our brain that we're not going to take on any more of that. We're going to stop the catastrophic thinking. We recognize that's what it is. We recognize it's a fear response. We're not shaming ourselves. We try to have patience with it. And there's a lot of other practices we can do, like box breathing and shaking it out and other emergency practices to deal with it. But two of the most simple are just to do some tapping and to put it in a frame and notice the space around the outside of it. So let's come back again. If there's catastrophic thinking, we could stop and deal with it that way, work with it. And then let's come back again to I'm strong and resilient. I feel fear. It's true. And I'm also aware of my strength and resilience. Notice what's coming up in your mind. Focus in again on that. So I just wanted to review again the fight, flight, freeze, fawn mechanisms, partly because it's always helpful to be aware of this for ourselves. And right now, especially, it's really helpful to be aware of it for other people and to keep coming back to that reality that most of what's going on right now that's difficult to deal with is from these mechanisms of survival. So one of the way that we get away from danger is flight, of course, and social distancing is one of those. There's other ways that we might do it too. We might pretend it's not happening. But in a responsible sense, we're social distancing, and that makes sense. We try to remove ourselves back away from the danger. And then, of course, another mechanism is freeze. So that doesn't work here for the COVID-19. We really don't benefit from being in freeze. We need to be able to be clear-headed. and really notice what's the actual danger here and how can I protect myself. And that when people are in denial and we're having conversations with people who are saying, that neighbor who said, "Oh, this is overblown. It doesn't matter," and then comes down with COVID-19. It's helpful for us to know that we can go into freeze and what we can do to bring ourselves out of freeze so that we're making the best decisions that we can, and also to know that that's the mechanism at work for a lot of other people as well. The fight response to fear includes judgmental, angry, blaming others. And that's one of the more difficult ones for everybody around us if we're going into a fight response, because it tends to increase fear on their part and it certainly breaks the connection. And if it's ourselves that are doing it, if we're going into it, a lot of people are feeling more irritable, more anger. What's the matter with people that they can't, blah, blah, blah. And so that's a natural response too, to not shame ourselves because shaming increases the disconnection and it increases the intensity of the response. And to try our best as well to be very present and patient with people who are having that fight response, whether that's us or other people. And also to keep ourselves safe. Like don't go into freeze around it and just think, well, everything will be okay. But to actually maybe to have that conversation about this is what happens in me when you do that. When I hear this angry voice, this is how I feel. Let's try to figure out a way to make this work for ourselves here in this situation. And then fawning, one of the ways that I'm seeing that happen is to try to appease somebody because there's a threat if we get disconnected. So somebody I was speaking with, her granddaughter lives with her, and she was saying that she doesn't want to break that connection with her granddaughter, but her granddaughter is out and about, seeing people, inviting people over. And so she's had to say, I need to protect myself here. And even though the cost of that could be a disconnection or even a break with her son and her granddaughter, that it's important for her to protect herself and to make a decision for herself that feels like the right one. And so that can be a long-standing pattern of, one person kind of decides and the other person goes along. And it might be that the threat is of someone's anger. And we kind of give in because we don't want to have to deal with the other person's anger. And in this situation, we really need to try to let go of those things as much as we can and to certainly to not shame ourselves if we're doing it. But just to be aware of it can be helpful, I think, sometimes as well. So we have these fight, flight, freeze, and fawn reactions, and to really be aware of them for ourselves and for each other. That this is what's going on. Look at all the stuff that's going on right now through this lens and see if that would help to make sense of what's going on with ourselves or what's going on with somebody else. And to keep coming back that to inhabit our body, even though there's might be a lot of fear here, is very important. We need to keep coming back, keep calming ourselves. There's so many practices that we can do. Box breathing, looking around the room, naming 5 things we see. There's a whole list of them on my emergency practices page on the website. But to keep coming back and inhabiting our body, noticing this is what it feels like right now. I'm feeling fear. It feels like a clench in my gut, or I notice my shoulders are tight. How can I down regulate and soften what's going on in my body? And then to work with thought as a process, like we can come to the back of our mind and look at the thoughts that are coming through. This is a catastrophic thought. Catastrophic thoughts create this kind of a reaction in our body. I stop breathing, everything tightens up. I could do some tapping. And so to work very, not intensely exactly, but work very mindfully with thought because it's so easy right now for thought to just kind of take over. So to really notice what's the content of our thoughts, how are we responding to it? Notice the energy in our body, and then to work with that to keep down regulating. And as much as you can to join us for that practice. I know most of the people here also come to the daily practice, and that would be a good thing to continue with or do more of right now while we're going through this together.